All right, guys, as many of you know, or at least you guys have been following me, know that tomorrow starts the 7th annual World Carnivore Month. That's something I started, again, 7 years ago in response to sort of Veganuary, which occurs in January. And I just happened to be born in January. I didn't really like the fact that my birth month had this silly vegan holiday in that. And so what I want to do is provide some what I consider essentials about starting a carnivore diet for those people that are trying this for the first time, because I think this is helpful information. I've been, uh, I've literally dealt with many, many thousands of people starting a carnivore diet over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been doing consultations on people with this. I still do those today. I spend an hour a day, during the week, doing consultations with people on adjusting their diet and that type of stuff. But anyway, so some of the things. First of all, what is a carnivore diet? So a carnivore diet is basically animal products. Anything that comes from an animal product is basically fair game on a carnivore diet. So that's obviously meat. It can be fish. It can be dairy products. It can be eggs. That's basically a carnivore diet. Now, not everybody will be able to include all of those things in there. What it doesn't include are things like fruit and vegetables and rice and sweet potatoes and honey and things like that. Those things may be fine for a lot of people, but it's not a carnivore diet. That may be, you call it an omnivore diet, basically, which is what it is. Animal-based, if you want to say that, but it's still an omnivorous diet. A carnivore diet is specifically something very different and unique, and I think that definition is important. I think that I consider it to be used as a therapeutic protocol. It can be used for a very specific indication or indications, of which there are many. It can be used for a limited time frame, and I'll talk about what I think is appropriate. And then if people enjoy it and want to continue that for a long period of time, perhaps indefinitely, perhaps for the rest of their life, I think that's also in many cases fine. I mean, I've been doing it for now, into my 8th year doing this, and I'm very happy with what I do. But anyway, let's talk about that. So, as I mentioned, animal products of really any type, that if it comes from an animal, it's on the menu. But realistically, most people are going to find a diet that is based in what's called ruminant meat to be probably the most effective. Ruminant meat being any kind of animal that ruminates. So think about a cow, think about a sheep, think about some of the wild animals, an elk, a deer, things like that. Those things are what I think a lot of people find they have a lot of success from that. There are some people that may have a large percentage of that come from things like pork or chicken or things like that. I know people in India struggle to get beef. I mean, that's not really on the menu. They might be able to get some buffalo or lamb in particular, or they spend you have a lot of eggs and dairy products and things like chicken that may make part of the menu. But for most of us, beef in particular is a good place to start. And I think that the other thing that's important is it does not have to be grass finished or grass fed or regenerative or anything like that. You can do very well with just regular old supermarket beef. Most people that have done this diet have done it that way with tremendous effect. Occasionally there's people who say they do better on one version or the other. Some people, like grass finished for either the way it tastes or the way they feel or the way they feel about it, how its impact on the environment. And that's totally fine too. Equally, there are people that prefer the grain-finished beef and actually do better from a health perspective eating grain-finished beef. And so I think that's an important concept to understand. Now, the other thing that a lot of people will want to sort of perhaps think about or sort of worry about is how much should I eat? What are my macros going to be? And I will tell you, if you're new to this diet, I wouldn't worry so much about limiting your macros or anything like that. I would just eat enough, all right? And what do I mean by eating enough, right? So eating enough is like, I'm going to eat enough healthy food, which I consider meat healthy food, so that I don't want a cupcake or whatever the garbage food that you might be struggling with, whether it's pizza, potato chips, or ice cream, or chocolate, or keto treats, or any of those types of things. Eat enough so you don't want those things. Now, this may not result in weight loss. This might even result in weight gain, but that's, in my view, okay initially, right? I mean, that's what we want to do. There's a lot of people that struggle with kind of sort of impulsive behavior, food addiction, significant cravings, and this is one way to deal with that. It's just eating enough nutrition so that you're full, you're satiated, you're satisfied. You don't want any of that stuff. And the other thing that I think is important here is to include enough fat in the diet. A lot of people talk about fatty red meat, ribeye steaks, which are wonderful and delicious. And I think that's a good place to start. Some people will find they can do better on a little bit leaner, and some people might even find that they prefer a little bit higher fat. So I think that's an important concept to understand. Now, when it comes to fat, I mean, we all have a sort of a threshold on how much fat we can consume in one setting before we sort of get overloaded and we can't digest it. And so what happens? Well, we end up kind of pooping it all out. We have this kind of diarrhea, we have bloating, we have digestive issues. And so there is sort of a fat threshold, if you will, of how much you can tolerate in one particular meal. And for some people it might be 75 grams, another person it might be 50, another person it might be 100 grams. So keep that in mind. And also, because you have a fat requirement, an energy requirement. You need X amount of energy to run your system, right? You're going to get it from fat. Protein is not a particularly good source of energy. Protein is great for structure, and it's important for many, many reasons in our body. But, as far as, how do we fuel ourselves when we're not eating carbohydrates? We got to have fat in the diet. And so let's just arbitrarily say we need 200 grams of fat a day, just for energy, that's 1,800 calories. If we can only tolerate, say, 75 grams in one meal before we start having those digestive systems, and we need 200, we're going to need to eat at least 3 times. 75 plus 75 is 150, and then we have another 50 more. So we're going to have to eat at least 3 times to sort of meet those requirements. And then the other thing around fat is the types of fat seem to matter. Remember, when we consume things like a steak, right, that fat is mixed into a matrix. It's mixed in with the protein. It's still in a sort of a solid sort of situation. And when you digest it in your stomach, what does the stomach do? It sits there and it grinds it up, and it kind of kneads it and massages it and breaks it down, sitting in that acid environment until eventually, little by little, it's broken down and it can be passed into the small intestine. And that's how it's supposed to work. When we consume rendered fat, and what is rendered fat? Well, it's pure fat. It's like cooked out fat. It might be butter, it might be bacon grease, it might be hamburger grease. When we eat a bunch of that at one time, our stomach has nothing to do to it. It's already broken down into its individual, it's already liquefied. So in that case, our stomach just says, okay, well, come on in. And so a lot of times what people will see with too much rendered fat is that big influx of fat in one sort of moment, again, overwhelms us, and we end up with bloating and gas and reflux and of course diarrhea and things like that. So be mindful on how much fat you need and how much fat you can consume in one setting. How do you know if you need more fat in your diet? You're tired, you don't have any energy. That's a pretty good way. You may not feel hungry like you did when you're eating a carb-based diet, where you're like, oh my God, I want to eat the next thing that appears in front of my face because I'm starving. That rarely happens on carnivore. Usually you're like, it's usually kind of more subtle. It's like, I could eat. It's not really, some people say if you're not hungry for a steak, you're not hungry. And I think there's a pretty good, that's not a bad framework to think about. Another common thing to realize when we're talking about the digestive system is your bowel frequency will change, right? If you're eating a high fiber diet, you can't use that fiber for the most part. You can ferment a little bit and get a little bit of caloric value from that, but very minimal. So most of our body says, we don't have much use for it, so we're just going to get rid of it. So it's just waste. And so you end up, going to the bathroom sometimes multiple times a day, 2, 3, 4 times a day in some cases. If you're on a vegan diet, maybe 7 times a day. That's going to change because meat is very well absorbed by our small intestine, basically. So almost completely absorbed with very little left over. So you're just going to make less poop. There's less poop in you to get rid of because you're absorbing everything. So instead of all those fancy fruits and vegetables, organic fruit and vegetables that you ate, couldn't digest half of it, and you just crapped in the toilet. You think about it, you spend all this extra money for these organic fruits and vegetables, and you're pooping it all out, right? With meat, you absorb everything. So all that nutrition is there. It's a very efficient system. That's why if we look at the history of animals, something like 80% of all animals that have ever walked the earth, flown the earth, or swam the earth have adopted a carnivorous pattern, a dietary pattern, because it's more efficient, right? So you're going to poop less, right? And it doesn't mean you're constipated just because you haven't had a bowel movement today. It might be that you don't got anything to get rid of it. It might take, particularly if you're a small eater and you're only eating like a pound of meat a day, it might take 2, 3, 4 days to build up enough poop to get rid of. So don't worry about infrequent bowel movements unless it's accompanied by pain. If you're, it's bloating and pain and difficulty and hard stools, then that's an issue, and that could be constipation. The things that you can do to help in that situation are activity, move more, stay hydrated, so consume more fluid and electrolytes, which I'll talk about in a second. You're going to want to, if you're eating a lot of dairy, particularly cheese, for some reason cheese, and I think the reasons for that are perhaps the calcium content, perhaps the stimulation of this casomorphine receptors, which may have a morphine-like effect on the bowel, which tends to slow the bowel down. So those are things, so elimination of dairy, being active, staying hydrated, are going to be helpful if that does occur in that case. On the other side of the spectrum is sort of diarrhea, and that can be from, again, over-consuming rendered fat, over-consuming fat in one sitting. It can be just a natural adaptation from not having fiber in the diet. Remember, the job of the colon is to reabsorb fluid and electrolytes, and when your fluid is sort of bound to fiber in a way, and it's not anymore, you're going to have a much more fluid sort of material coming out of that small intestine into the colon, and that increased fluid may be more than the colon's used to absorbing, and so you may just lose some of that. And so that's usually limited to maybe a few days or a few weeks, and that usually gets better. So another thing I should say is time frame on a carnivore diet. I know a lot of people are going to do it for a month in January, which I think is great. Honestly, I think if you can stick it out for 3 months, like if you want to solve some health issue, if you're doing this for a health reason, say you have an autoimmune disease or diabetes or something like that, then 3 months is a better trial period, right? And I should mention this as well. If you are significantly sick, you're on multiple medications, a lot of diabetic meds, hypertension meds, things like that, it makes sense to get a healthcare provider involved, because you're going to probably have to taper off a lot of those medications, and there's ways to do that are safe, and there's ways to do that aren't so safe. And in fact, maybe you should wait and maybe hop on Rivera, where we have physicians in all 50 states that can help you do those types of things. So maybe in that situation, maybe you wait until you and jump on Rivera and get physician guidance on this, because I think for many people it can be very important. All right, let's talk about another topic, hydration. We know that when we go low carb in general, we see generally a decrease in overall insulin levels. Insulin has an impact on our kidneys. It tells our kidneys to retain salt. And when we retain salt, we tend to retain fluid with that. And so when we do the opposite and our insulin comes down, as it often does on just low carb diets in general, and a carnivore diet certainly is that, you're going to see a general diuresis. You're going to lose water, right? So that may lead to things like lightheadedness, headache, dizziness, heart palpitations. Stay hydrated. And how do you do that? Well, obviously fluid, but often electrolytes are helpful to keep that fluid on board. The electrolytes help keep the fluid on the body. When we just consume straight up, like distilled water, particular, we can only absorb so much, and the rest of it will just pee out because we end up diluting our electrolytes too much. The other thing is, let's talk about ketosis, right? A carnivore diet can be a ketogenic diet, but it's not always a ketogenic diet. That depends on how much protein you're consuming, how much fat you're consuming, how frequently you're consuming, how much you're exercising, how long between meals you're going. So I don't really worry about ketones, unless there's specific instances where it may be more beneficial, maybe some central nervous system issues. There's a couple of situations where measuring ketones may be of benefit. I generally tell people don't worry about it, for carnivore to start out. Again, eat plenty so that you don't have cravings. And let me go back to the cravings things. You're going to have cravings at some point. It might be on day 6. It might be on January 17th. You get these cravings. You need a plan in place, right? Planning or failure to plan is planning to fail. So what can I do when a craving comes? Let's talk about why the cravings occur. Well, cravings often are tied to hormonal fluctuations. There's one called ghrelin in particular, that when ghrelin peaks, we get hungry. And the thing to know about is typically these hormonal fluctuations are time limited, often 30, 45 minutes. That hormone will peak and then it'll come back down, and then we're no longer hungry again. So if you can make it that 30 to 45 minutes through that craving, then you can, maybe you can avoid binging on probably, food that's not so good for you. So what is your plan? What are the things you can do? Well, distract yourself. Can you distract yourself for 30 to 45 minutes? Can you go for a walk? Can you read a book? Can you hop on a phone call? Can you exercise for 30, 45 minutes so that, that time passes and you get through that craving. We've probably all experienced this phenomenon where, we've gone to bed hungry, right? Because when we just didn't have anything to eat, we're just like, shit, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat. Nothing to eat, and go to bed, and you wake up the next morning, you're not hungry. It's like, how the hell could I have been hungry when I went to bed and woke up the next day and not be hungry? Well, it's because the hormones have sort of, went back down. So that's why we see that. So if you can get through a craving period, either distract yourself or have a carnivore appropriate snack, have some, extra meat available. I like to do these dried meat where I'll take thin cut strips of meat and I'll put them in a food dehydrator with some salt on there. It's almost like a potato chip. It's a nice little snack to have. You can just drink a bunch of water. I mean, water will distend your gut for a period of time, enough to often last for 30, 45 minutes. So there are, like I said, have a plan in place for cravings. There's some other, like unique concerns. What about gout? What about a gallbladder? Heart disease, cholesterol, all those things, that I think carnivore is appropriate in all those cases with caveats. It's beyond the scope of this particular video to talk about that. And if you have a specific concern, I've probably made a video about it. Or if you want to, you can always book a consultation with me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about any of this type of stuff. Or, of course, I wrote a book about this, The Carnivore Diet, a few years ago, which I think still is an excellent book. I don't think I would have changed much of any. I would have added some of the new literature, but beyond that, I think it holds up very well. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great World Carnivore Month. I hope some of you guys stick it out for 3 months. I hope it changes your lives for the better. If there's anybody that feels I missed, certainly feel free to add to it in the comments, because I think there's a lot of insight and wisdom of the crowd, so to speak, for people that have a lot of information on this stuff. All right, guys, you guys have a great rest of your 2023, and I look forward to 2024. It's going to be a great year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.